Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our advanced group training. This is class number 4 of 7. Today is August 26, 2019. Of course, Mike Rich is hosting here as always, and just excited to share this training with you today. Thank you for taking some time to join us. I'm probably, like many of you, fired up because we just got to hear an exceptional training from Ms. Gail Ross this morning. I really appreciate her sharing that training on our morning call, as well as we got to hear from Mr. Jeff Bell, the CEO of LegalShield, was on our call live, and just excited to hear from him as well. And so we're going to dive into this 4th session today, and of course, as always, if you have any questions, please just enter them through the questions panel, and we'll make this as interactive as we possibly can. I always like going through your questions. Our time today will probably be a little bit shorter. This 4th session is typically one that doesn't take the full 2 hours that we allot for this. So anyway, but definitely post any questions that you have, and of course I want to hear from you if they relate to today's topic or any general questions that you might have about building your employee benefits business here at LegalShield Business Solutions. So I'll be happy to take that time and go through those. I know that we're right in the middle of enrollment season. August just always seems to be one of our biggest enrollment months. And of course, we're getting into the 4th quarter as well. And I wanted to take just a minute and talk about that with you here this morning. Well, let me yeah, I will. I'll go ahead and talk about that, and then, of course, we'll talk about your activity reports before we get into our actual topic that's on the slate for today. But the 4th quarter in our business is a very unique time. It can either be your worst quarter of the year or your best quarter of the year, and it's typically one of the two. So let me just kind of break that down and kind of give you an idea of what to expect as you get into the 4th quarter. I know some of you are thinking it's August. What's he talking about 4th quarter? We're still over a month away from the 4th quarter. The reason that it can be one of your best months of the year is if you prepare, and if you get ready for it, then you can write a ton of business during open enrollments in the 4th quarter. But those meetings are happening right now. They've been happening for the last couple of weeks. They'll still be happening over the next couple of weeks. When I say those meetings, you've got companies that are meeting right now today discussing what they're going to do for their benefits and during open enrollment in the 4th quarter. Now, a lot of those groups, their benefits are going to become effective January 1st, and so you'll be paid on those in the month of December, whether you write that business in November or even late October or early December. That's just how that works. You get paid when those benefits become effective. And that's typically a week or two before the end of the month of December that they'll process all of that January 1st business that they've got in office. And so, again, those meetings are happening right now. How do you take advantage of that? How do you prepare for that? By prospecting. I mean, we've got to get that message out right now like never before. I've been singing that song for the last couple of weeks here on our advanced training, and I'm going to continue to sing that song today. Prospect, prospect, prospect more than ever right now during that season. Decision maker meetings that you're having this week and next week, a lot of those will line yourself up really nicely to be able to roll out those benefits during the 4th quarter. And some of them may not have a January 1st effective date. I mean, some of them they might just make effective immediately. But some, if they have if you're doing that as part of a company's open enrollment, then it would probably be a 1/1 effective date, which is fine. You're going to want that business. So go out and grab it. Any decision maker meetings that you do in the month of September or October, you can close typically that business pretty easily before the end of the year. And that could be true too of the business that you, or of the decision makers rather, that you meet with for the first week or two of November. But as you get into November, especially as you start getting towards the middle of November, then that's the holiday season. And it doesn't mean that it's not a good time to do business. It's actually a great time to do business, and you'll have a lot of successful decision maker meetings, and you'll definitely have a lot of successful enrollments throughout that entire holiday season. However, the decision makers that you meet with, if you're doing a meeting and it's the last week of November or the first week of December, the majority of those decision maker meetings, the decision maker will say, this sounds really good, let's do this after the first of the year. That's something that you'll hear a lot more as you get into, again, mid-November, late November, early December. And if you do a decision maker meeting at the end of December, you'll almost always hear that. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't exceptions, because I could share a bunch of stories with you. I mean, I just opened a group last year myself, and we did the enrollment like December 29th, and we did the decision maker meeting like on December 27th. I mean, it was right after Christmas, and it was smack dab in the middle of that holiday week between Christmas and New Year's, and we still got the group open and got them set up before January 1st. So that's not to say that you can't have exceptions to that rule, but the general rule is once you get to mid-November, those decision maker meetings, a lot of them are going to be scheduling enrollments for after the first of the year. Now, my advice will be at that point, go ahead and get the enrollment scheduled, because an enrollment scheduled on January 14th is better than let me call you back the first week of January and we'll talk about when to do the enrollment, because you'll have a hard time following up on those. They just don't remember, they forgot what you had talked about in all of the holidays. So it's better to schedule those enrollments, but a lot of them will be scheduled for after the first of the year. If you want to have enrollments throughout the months of October, November, and December, then you need to really do the decision maker meetings right now in September. And again, in October, a lot of those will schedule enrollments in November and December as well. So I just want you to be thinking ahead. I remember my first year in the business. I went full time in the middle of June, and this was 2002. And I was writing a significant amount of business. I was doing about 50 sales a month for July, August, September, October, November. And then in December, my wife and I took a cruise. We went on a big 10-day cruise, which was really about 2 weeks, because there were weekends on either end of those. So I was gone basically those first 2 weeks of November. And I got back, like, I don't remember the exact date, but it was probably around the 18th of December. And we got back from this big cruise, and I was ready to go. I was ready to go write business. The problem was no one was ready to listen to me. It was the holidays. So that was my worst month that I've ever had. It's the only month that I did not executive director qualify. And that kind of bothers me, because my brother, Mark, has executive director qualified every month since he went full time. And I can't say that because December of 2002 is the only month that I missed. But it taught me a very important lesson. You can't wait till December to start preparing for December. You've got to be thinking ahead. It's the one time of year that you've got to plan ahead and prepare to be able to have business to go right. Now, the enrollments that you do in December are fantastic. I've written, and every year since then, I've always tried to plan ahead and schedule enrollments for December, and they're fantastic enrollments. I've learned this: December is a month where everyone's spending money, and so to sign up for one more thing, it's not a big deal. And that's my favorite pitch in December. I'll say, hey, look, some of you are buying Christmas presents for your kids and spending a whole lot more money than you're going to spend on this membership to buy toys for your kids that they're going to play with for 10 minutes and then forget that they have. Isn't it worth that to protect your family? And that's my enrollment line in the month of December. But we've written a ton of business in December. It is a great month to write business, as is November, as is October. The fourth quarter, I mean, really every month is a great month, but the December is not an exception. And if anything, it might be the best month to write business in. I remember Brian Fahili went and did an enrollment. I think it was his first year being full-time in the business. He went and did an enrollment at a school on December 23rd. And I mean, we're talking 2 days before Christmas. And I was, kind of as his team leader, I was trying to kind of prepare him that this might not go well, because I'm thinking this is 2 days before Christmas. Those people aren't going to want to buy a membership. So I had told Brian, hey, if it doesn't go well, it's okay. It's Christmas time. And so he called me the morning of the 23rd. It was on his way back from the enrollment. He had to be there early to enroll these teachers. It was a staff meeting that they had, which was kind of weird that they were doing a staff meeting that late, before Christmas. But anyway, he called me and he sounded real disappointed on the phone. He said, man, that could have gone a lot better. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry, man. I told you, it's kind of a tough time. And then he said, yeah, it could have gone a lot better because there were 26 people in the room and I only got 24 of them signed up. I could have got those last two. And I was like, are you serious? He had written 24 out of 26 employees up. I'm telling you, December is a great time to write business. But if you wait till late November or December to try to write it, to try to schedule it, you're just going to have a hard time. So be thinking ahead about that fourth quarter. What groups can you write, or what groups can you meet with today that you can write as we get into the fourth quarter? And of course, some of the groups that you meet with today, you're going to enroll them this week. If it's a smaller company and they only have a few employees, they might be able to get them together this week, or certainly some you'll write in the month of September. But this is also a great time for those of you that have been doing decision makers throughout this year, decision maker meetings, I should say, throughout this year. This is also a great time to go follow up with all of those as well and see what you can get scheduled for enrollment for September, and then, of course, as we get into the fourth quarter. So I just wanted to take a minute and kind of prep you for that. That's the lesson that I learned the hard way that first year, is that you've really got to think ahead and prep for your fourth quarter. I also mentioned, kind of having a list of companies. That's something that I call your active enrollment list. And I'll use those initials, AEL, that stands for your active enrollment list. You might jot that down in your notes. Your active enrollment list, that's the list of companies that you're looking to enroll right now. So if I set a decision maker meeting for later this week, that company would not yet be on my active enrollment list. But when I meet with that decision maker and I schedule the enrollment, that's when I put that company on my active enrollment list. And that's something that I always had, was kind of a list of companies or a list of groups that I had the enrollment scheduled. Now, if I had a really good decision maker meeting and we had talked about a couple of tentative dates, but we hadn't quite nailed it down yet, I might add that company to my active enrollment list, but it was really reserved for companies where the enrollment was already scheduled. That also, other companies that I would add are companies that I was reservicing that the enrollment was coming up. So when you go open a group, for example, this week, one of the things that you'll talk about in opening the group is, when are you going to schedule the re-enrollment for? When is your first servicing visit going to be? Marty Galano talks about setting them up, every group, on an annual enrollment cycle. Now, some companies are already set up that way, but he says even if they're not, I set them up that way. And I tell them, look, we're going to be here next year at the same time to do a re-enrollment. Now, if you don't set that up and if you don't prepare them for that, that may not happen. But he doesn't really give them a choice. He just says this is the way that we have to do it. We have to come enroll every year. And some companies, if they have a little bit higher turnover, you could do on a 6-month enrollment schedule. But But the companies that I've got coming up that I've got appointments with to go back in and present to again, those would go on my AEL, my active enrollment list. And that's always a good question to ask. What does your AEL look like right now? So if you were to list out every company with which you have an enrollment already scheduled, now if you just meet with the decision maker and they say that's really good, but I've got to go get approval, that does not go on your active enrollment list because you really don't have the enrollment set yet. But if you've got the enrollment scheduled, even if it's tentatively scheduled, I would add them to your active enrollment list. And if I ask you right now today, what does your active enrollment list look like for September, for example? So, every company that's on there is going to have a date next to it as well. What does your active enrollment list look like for September? Then it's going to give me a pretty good idea of what your September is going to look like. And I could ask you that today on August 26th. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't find some additional companies and add them to that list that you might enroll in September. Certainly you will if you're out there meeting with some companies. But this is all that idea of planning ahead. And I can tell you, like if you don't have any right now, I can tell you, unless you drastically change your activity, September is not going to be a very big month for you. But if you've got 6 companies on your active enrollment list for September, now 2 or 3 of those might even reschedule, but that's okay because 3 or 4 of them won't reschedule. And if you have 6 companies on your active enrollment list on your AEL for September, I can tell you that's going to be a pretty good month for you. Okay, so anyway, that's something that we'll come back to in a little bit here. Your active enrollment list, that's just a really good practice to be in. And I mentioned if I were to look at your active enrollment list, but the key is you need to look at your active enrollment list and you need to be honest with yourself and look at that list and say, okay, is my September shaping up the way that I want it to or the way that I need it to in order for me to get the results that I'm looking for in September? And if the answer is yes, fantastic. And it's still a good time to double down. Even though you've got a lot of activity coming up in September, it's still a good time to double down on prospecting because you might as well grab the opportunity while it's at hand. But if you're one of those that looks at your active enrollment list for September today and says, it's not looking real good, I don't have a whole lot of companies set up for enrollment in September, then you've got to change what you're putting in the front end. And that activity, when it comes to prospecting, the number of calls that you make, you better triple that this week to change what that active enrollment list can look like for September. I'm not trying to say that if your list does not look good right now, that it's hopeless for you. I am saying that if your list does not look that great right now, you've got to change it. You've got to take control of that. And that means increase your prospecting, get in front of more decision makers so that you can start setting enrollments for the month of September. All right, as a review here, speaking of numbers, thank you to all of those who have reported their activity. I want you to continue to do that. We are at the point where we're starting to analyze that activity, and I will do that with you offline. I'm not going to do it in front of everybody here, but I might make a couple of case examples next week. I'll get people's permission to be able to do that. I would like to be able to share a couple of case examples with you, but please continue to report your prospecting activity. Now you'll notice we're not measuring everything there. The whole premise of that is to measure your prospecting. And I know that we talked about prospecting 2 weeks ago, but your prospecting is at the heart of everything that you do. I mean, yes, I want you to have a ton of enrollments for September, but unless you're prospecting, that's not going to happen. I want you to have a ton of decision maker meetings this week and next week, but unless you're prospecting, that's not going to happen. That's why we're measuring your prospecting. I want to make sure that your prospecting is as effective as it possibly can be. And for all of you who have continued to enter those prospecting numbers over the last 2 weeks, you're really starting to build some great data there. that we can look at, and again, I'll be doing that with you individually offline. But I want to thank those of you who have been doing that religiously. Some of you need to be doing a better job at entering that activity. And again, that site, www.reportmyactivity.com, is where you can go to do that. You can go back, by the way, and enter for days that you may have missed. So you got to put in the day that you're reporting for, but like you could go back and report for every day last week. And again, even if you have a day that's a 0, still report it. That helps us build that data. I just wanted to review this system with you again this morning. This is the system that we're really focused on throughout these 7 weeks of training. So we talked about getting qualified leads a couple of weeks ago. We actually talked about that first step and second step prospecting on the same day. But that was where we really got into, working your warm market, to supplementing some of your warm market with cold market leads. And I know that many of you took that seriously, because I've had conversations with many of you where you're using Reference USA and you're using some of those tools to supplement with cold market, or supplement your warm market leads with cold market leads. And I've talked to many of you that are working some of those warm market leads as well, and I think that's fantastic. You'll notice that we measure those separately on your activity report, because the numbers there really should be different. You should be getting better results with warm market leads in general. And so, but that's kind of step number 1. You got to know who you're going to be calling. Step number 2, you've got to call them or call on them, so you can prospect in person if you choose to. And you'll notice that we measure that separately in your activity reports as well. Again, your in-person ratio should be much higher than your phone ratio. So you ought to be able to set an appointment every 5 to 10 businesses that you walk into cold. If it's warm, it'll be better than that. But cold market, every 5 or 10 companies, you ought to be able to set an appointment in. It might take you 40 to 60 phone calls to set that one appointment. Again, that's what we're doing, is we're looking at your ratios. That's why I'm having you report that activity. When you look at the time involved, it's about the same, because you can make 50 phone calls in the time that it takes you to visit 5 to 10 companies. I mean, because it takes so much longer to do it in person. So your yield per time invested should be about the same, whether you're doing it in person or over the phone. But your ratio should definitely be higher if you're prospecting in person. Again, it doesn't really matter to me how you prospect. As long as you're doing the activity, that's what's important. Now, we talked about that a couple of weeks ago, but if some of you are not in a position where you're going to go out and buy a bunch of mugs and chocolate, or have nice gifts that you can hand out while you're prospecting in person, then I would prospect over the phone. And you don't have much of a choice if that's the situation that you're in, except for prospect over the phone enough that you can set your first enrollment or two, and then take up some of that money and use it as capital to invest in gifts if you prefer to prospect in person. And we have certainly people who do that. We have some people that they enjoy prospecting over the phone. The phone works fine for them. They would rather just sit there in sweats and a T-shirt for 3 hours while they prospect. Some people get dressed up because it makes them feel more professional, even though they're prospecting over the phone. That's fine too. But some people just really prefer it. There's no gas expense. They don't have to buy the gifts. The only gifts that they're giving out are the gifts for the decision makers when they actually go and meet with them. So, that's totally fine. Again, it does not matter to me how you prospect, whether it's in person or over the phone. What does matter is that you are prospecting consistently, because when you don't prospect, that's not going to make any money. We talked last week about the decision maker meeting, that third step of the employee benefit system. That DM meeting is so crucial, and so we talked about a lot of tips of how to build trust and what to spend time on during your meeting. We talked about how to close your decision maker meetings last week, and I sent out the language for that that I use. Now, again, I'll always give that disclaimer that that's not the only way to do it. Certainly, we have a lot of different ways a lot of different language that people are going to use. and that's fine. But if you want to use my language because I know that it is effective, then I would encourage you to practice that and really try to master that very simple language that's involved in closing a decision maker meeting. Next week, we're going to get into the enrollment, and you're actually going to be able to hear a sample enrollment from one of our top producers, and I'm excited for you to be able to hear that enrollment live on this training. And then we'll spend some time really talking about how to maximize those enrollments when you're in front of a group of employees. And then that fifth step is not really a step. It's something that you got to focus on. Once you open groups, how can you service those groups consistently and regularly? And how can you focus on writing good business? That retention aspect is so important. If you're brand new, excuse me, I have to take a drink here every once in a while. If you're brand new, then you'll just have to take my word for it, that retention is crucial, that retention is vital, that retention is so important when you're working with groups. If you've been around for a while, then you know that retention is important because you've seen retention affect your bonuses, either good or bad. They've had an impact on your bonuses. The Performance Club bonuses now are all tiered so that the higher retention you have, the bigger bonus that you get. And you may have seen it affect your residual income. And that's really, retention affects your residuals in two ways. Number one, obviously, the more business that stays on the books, the more business you're going to earn a residual on. But number two, your retention actually is what determines the percentage of your renewal. And as we get into that, I'll share a little bit more detail with you about that. But when I say retention is important and you want to sell good business and keep business on the books, that's really going to have a dramatic impact on your long-term income that you get from LegalShield. But those are the 5 steps of the system. Again, I kind of look at this screen right here. These are the shells that you have to build in your mind. And then every training that you hear that relates to employee benefits really is going to impact one or more of these shells, right? So when I say build the shells in your mind, then when you hear a training on our Monday morning call and it's about prospecting, you take that information and you put that on that second shelf in your mind, mentally, that prospecting shelf. When you hear a training about enrollments like Dave Paperno gave us recently, that's information that you can take and put on that 4th shelf, the enrollment shelf. But this is the structure. This is the backbone. This is the outline. This is what makes the system work. This is the system that works when you're talking about employee benefits. It's these 5 steps right here, and this is really what's at the heart of this advanced training. It's what is at the heart of the training that we're going to do in Salt Lake City, that Solutions and Action training that I hope many of you have signed up for and are going to be a part of in Salt Lake City coming up on October 3rd. It's this system that is really the backbone of what we do in employee benefit sales. What I want to spend some time talking about today, let's see, I think I've got the wrong, hold on just one second here. That was from last week. I'll check my PowerPoint, excuse me. Okay, I think that we are back on here. All right, what I want to talk about today, forgive me, is this topic right here. And what I share here is going to be relevant for several steps of the system. But I want to spend some time talking about things that you can measure and things that you cannot. And in our business, and I'm going to give you quite a few examples here, there are a lot of things that you can absolutely measure. Every day, every week, every month, every year, you can measure certain things. And then there's a whole other list of things that we'll talk about that are important, but that you can't really measure. So here are just some examples of that, some things that you can measure in our business. For example, how many calls do you make in a day? whether that's over the telephone or in person, how many calls, how many businesses are you going to reach out to in a day? That's measurable. So I always think of a training that Jim Rohn did where he talks about, the numbers are the numbers and the numbers don't lie. And he said, when he was getting started, he would kind of take an inventory in his team, and he would call through his team and say, okay, how many calls did you make today? And some people would start kind of giving an excuse. Well, I was sick or I had something come up. And his answer was, no, I just need a number. The space on my paper is real small. I can't write the whole excuse. It's a space for a number. I just need a number. So that number might be 0, but the number is what matters. And you can do that because that's something that you can measure. I can ask you right now today, how many decision makers do you have set up to meet with this week? How many DM meetings do you have on your calendar right now this week? Now, there's still time to improve that number because you could prospect today and set a meeting for Thursday or Friday this week. You could set a meeting for tomorrow if you wanted to. But that is something that's measurable. It's something that you can put a number to. And whatever that number is, it's your number. How many sales did you write in a month? Or we could put there, how many premium dollars did you write? Both of those are measurable results. Certainly, how much income do you have in a certain year? That's measurable. You can ask somebody how they did last year income-wise in this business. You could ask me how much did you make last year, and I could give you a lot of different answers. I could say, well, it was more than the year before, or I could say it was more than I ever thought I would make, or I could say it wasn't as much as I wanted to make, or I could say it was, well, I had some things come up. I could give you an excuse. But none of those would really answer the question because that's a measurable thing. How much income did you make last year? $325,000. That's a number. Or whatever that number is. If it's $50,000 or $122,000, it's a number. And you could be very specific with that number. LegalShield measures that. They send you a 1099 at the end of the year. When you read your 1099, it doesn't say a lot. What was your income? A lot. Or not enough. It doesn't say that. It gives you a number. So it's not subjective. It's 100% objective. It's just the number. Now, that number for you might mean something different than a number for someone else. For example, if you made $275,000 this year in your LegalShield business, for many of you, $275,000 would be a great number, something that you would be very proud of. And I assure you that if you showed that 1099 to my brother Mark, he would look at that and say, how do you live on only $275,000 a year? And I mean, that's his line. I've heard it many times, and it's a real thing. Although he would probably be saying that somewhat in jest, kind of razzing you a little bit. But for him, if that number were $275,000, he wouldn't know what to do. He wouldn't be able to keep the lights on at his house. I mean, it's so in that way, a number can mean something different to different people. It can be somewhat subjective, but the result is not subjective. It's objective. It's just a number. It's a measurable result. That's absolutely the case with your Performance Club points, and it's absolutely the case. I mentioned we would come back and talk about this AEL. Again, that's your active enrollment list. How many companies do you have on your active enrollment list right now? That is a question with a measurable answer. You can't say a lot, or you can't say a little, or you can't say not enough, or you can't say too many. I mean, you can, but those aren't real answers. And we've got to learn how to deal with measurable results in a measurable way. Because too many times you look at how many calls did you make in the day, and there are way too many people in this business that would answer that, but without a measurable answer. So they would say enough, or not very many, or what. And I need you to know the number for that. We've got to get better at measuring measurable results in a quantitative way. And we've got to look at it in that way, but you've got to know the number. How many enrollments are on your active enrollment list right now? Not enough. That's not an answer. How many are on there? Be real with yourself. The problem is when we try to disguise an answer that we're not very proud of with jargon that's subjective or not real clear. The problem is we don't really get at the heart of the issue, and we try to throw a smoke screen over it, or we try to mask it in a certain way that makes us feel better. But sometimes you don't need to feel better. Or if any one of these things on this screen is not a good result for you, deal with that. Don't make excuses. Don't give, don't give again, subjective fluff to try to cover that up. Own it and deal with it. Because when you do, that's when you can change it. If you look at your income this year in 2019 and it's not where you need it to be, own that and then deal with it. And let's make the last 4 months of this year better. And let's get your income to where you need it to be. The great news is everything on this screen you have control over. Whether that's the performance club points that you write, whether that's the sales that you write in a month, whether it's how many decision maker meetings you have scheduled for this week, all of that you have control over. Now, you have more direct control over the first thing on this list, because whether people say no or whether people say yes, none of that matters to how many calls you make in a day. And it does matter to some of the other things. I mean, you have to have decision makers say yes in order to schedule a decision maker meeting. You have to have employees say yes in order to write sales and have performance club points, and that affects your income as well. You have to have decision makers say yes to impact the number of companies on your active enrollment list. So those items you have indirect control over, but you have control over it all. And that's why we are measuring your numbers, because once you know your ratios, then you have full control over the outcome, just like you have control over what you put in on the front end. For example, if you know that it takes you 64 calls to schedule a decision maker meeting, then the only question is, how fast can you make 64 calls? And no matter what that ratio is, if your number's 32, if it's half that, then again, how fast can you make 32 calls? And that goes back to that same Jim Rohn training where he says, you've got to know your numbers, and once you know your numbers, you can win every time. And he uses the example. He says, if for example, you get 9 out of 10, and I only get 1 out of 10, and you and I have a contest, I'm gonna beat you, because you'll do 10 calls and get 9, but I'll do 100 and get 10. And so again, the whole point here is there are things that you can measure, and we need to look at these things quantitatively. In other words, don't hide behind an excuse. Deal with the real number. And some of you, I don't mean to make it sound like everyone, those numbers are not as good as they should be. Some of you, the numbers are great. You look at the sales that you've got so far in the month of August, and you're on one of your record months here, and that's fantastic. But own that. Deal with it. And if it's a positive thing, own it as well. And then what can you do to make sure next month looks the same or better? Those are all examples of things that you can measure. Here are some more. And it says here, some things that you can measure are a reflection of a skill set, and this is what I was just talking about. That's, for example, the percentage of calls that you get a decision maker on the phone. We've talked about that over the last couple of weeks. If 10% of the time you're getting a decision maker on the phone, then again, that if I want to talk to 5 decision makers today, I've got to make 50 calls. If you're prospecting in person, that same thing applies. If you know that you got to call on 6 companies to get 1 decision maker to come out, how fast can you go call on 6 more companies? Now, you might work on improving these ratios too. For example, the next one there, the percentage of the time that you speak to a DM and get a meeting. If you know that you schedule a decision maker meeting and 10% of the time, so you've got to get 10 decision makers on the phone to schedule one meeting, you might look at improving that. Could you get that to 1 out of 8 and maybe 1 out of 7 and maybe eventually 1 out of 6 or 1 out of 5? Well, sure, you could improve that, but unless you know the number, you really, it doesn't matter. And I'd want you to improve, and some of you need to improve, but it starts with knowing what those ratios are. What's your closing ratio in an enrollment? If right now you're enrolling 20% of the employees that you get in front of, yes, I think that you can probably improve that, but in the short term, get in front of more employees. That's the other way to meet your goals. And so eventually that might go to 30, that might go to 40, that might go to 50 or 60 or 70% average enrollment rate. But if it doesn't, then just get in front of more people. Same thing with your closing ratio in a decision maker meeting. Those are all things that you can measure. Now I'm trying to give you some examples here of things that you ought to be measuring. I hope that you're tracking these results. Now you have to start with a good enough sample size. That's why I didn't call anybody after the first day of entering numbers or even the first week. On that reportmyactivity.com, I didn't call anybody last week and say, well, that's not true. I did look at a couple people's numbers with them, but I preface those conversations by saying this is a very small sample size that we're looking at. I mentioned that when you started entering those numbers, we got to really look at them for 3 weeks before we really get the sample size to be able to know what the ratio is. You can't go meet with 4 or 5 decision makers and know what your real closing ratio is. You got to meet with 15, 20, 25. And then you've got a big enough sample size that you really know what your ratio is. Good or bad. Same thing with the enrollment. You can't do one enrollment and know what your enrollment ratio is. You got to do 5 or 10 to really start getting an average, because you could go do one enrollment where everybody signs up and say, well, I've got a 100% enrollment ratio. Well, let's see what it is after 5 or 10. It's probably not going to be 100%. And by the same token, you could go do an enrollment today that totally bombs. If it's your first enrollment and you sign up 0 out of the employees that were there. Well, 0 is not your real ratio. You got to go do 5 or 10 more enrollments, and then you'll be able to kind of peg what your real ratio is. Again, I want to encourage every one of us to look at these things that you can measure, to know them and to track them. Sometimes people will start with a better ratio, and then they get 2 or 3 months down the road and their ratio has gone down a little bit. And sometimes they've got to get back to what they were doing before. That's not uncommon at all. We get people that get in, they do 10, 15, 20 enrollments, and they've got a 60% close rate. So 60% of the employees that they're talking to are signing up. And then they go do their next 5 or 10 enrollments, and they find that their close rate has gone down to 40%, from 60 to 40. And they think, what's wrong? And here's what's happened a lot of the times. They've added something more to their presentation. Maybe their presentation has gotten a little bit longer. Sometimes that excitement that they had in the beginning has kind of waned a little bit, and they're not bringing that to every presentation. But that's why it's important not to measure these things just in the beginning, but to measure them ongoing so that you can make sure that your percentages are always improving, or at least always staying to where you need them to be. Now let's talk here about some things that are important in this business that you cannot measure. And the whole idea here is that both of these different categories, things that you can measure and things that you cannot, that both of those are important. And you can't have one without the other. It's kind of like having two paddles. If you can imagine, if you were in a canoe or a little rowboat, and you've got a paddle on each side. If you kind of think about it like that, the right side are the things that you can measure, and the left side are the things that you cannot measure. And you say, which is important? Well, they're both important. If you just paddle on one side, you're going to go around in circles. You're not going to actually get anywhere. But when you paddle on both sides, that's when you can move forward. And that's kind of how this works. You got to have things that you can measure and things that you cannot measure. We've got people that do that have a lot of these things on the list here, things that they cannot measure. They got great attitude, they've got vision, they're committed, they believe in what they're doing. We got some people, they're such LegalShield believers, man. They get a Lady of Justice tattooed on their chest. I mean, I'm saying that facetiously, but I mean, we got people that have all those things that we would consider intangible or unmeasurable, but if they don't do any activity, it doesn't really do them any good. And by the same token, we got people that have the stuff that you can measure. They're doing the activity, they're making the calls, but they lack in these areas. And so their results really suffer. And sometimes it feels like they're just going around in circles. So let's talk about each of these things that you cannot measure. And this is certainly not a comprehensive list, but it's a good list. Things like attitude. Did you know that the attitude that you bring to each conversation will have an impact on the results that you get? Just try it. Try prospecting for an hour with a frown on your face and see if that doesn't impact your results. A lot of people, if you did that for 10 minutes, you wouldn't want to keep prospecting. You'd want to give up. I mean, it makes you feel worse. Versus try prospecting for a few days with a big smile on your face. Every call, you watch your results get better. Your attitude has a direct impact. The vision that you have, you can't really measure vision. There's no scale for vision. I can't go to somebody, here on the training and say, hey, put your thumb on this little pad here and I'm going to tell you what your vision score is. Or let's do a blood test and I'll tell you, how great vision you have. You can measure your physical vision, 20/20 vision, for example. But when I say vision, I'm talking about your, the way that you see things before they happen. I'm talking about Helen Keller's quote, the only thing worse than being blind is having sight but no vision. So, again, what do you see for yourself in the future? And some people have very, very, very poor vision. Now, they can see things just fine, but their vision is terrible because they don't have any imagination. They don't have any expectation of what is to come. Momentum is one of those things that, again, very important in our business. It's hard to measure, but you know that it's real because some of you have had times in this business where you've had really good momentum. And Scott Brooks talks about that's one of the hardest things to get and one of the easiest things to lose. Momentum is why when you make an appointment on the phone or in person, the last thing that you want to do is take a break. Keep going. Your next few phone calls, you're much more likely to get another appointment. That's momentum. When you open a group, keep going. Go open another group. When you have a decision maker meeting and you walk out, hit the 5 businesses on the right and hit the 5 businesses on the left, because you've got to harness that momentum that you have. That momentum is crucial to your success. Discipline is a tough one. You could argue that you can measure discipline because it really does, it's reflected in your activity, right? So someone that says I'm very disciplined, but I just don't make very many prospecting calls, you could argue is not very disciplined. So, but I put it on this list of things that you cannot measure because, again, there's no score for it. There's no discipline score. I can't say Judy Johnston, man, she she's 97% disciplined. I mean, she is disciplined, but there's not really a way to measure that, I guess, unless you looked at the actual activity that she's doing, and then you could say that that's a reflection of her discipline. But even then, it would be somewhat subjective because, like Blake Pillman, for example, is one of our new associates that just started. Well, Blake's still working a full-time job, so his disciplined activity is going to look different than Stephanie Panchishan, who's full-time. Her disciplined activity would be a lot greater than Blake's just because she has more time in the day. So again, in that way, that's why I've got it on this things that you cannot measure, because even though you could see it in results, sometimes those results are a reflection of other factors, not just your discipline. Commitment is one of those things that, again, important. You got to be committed. You got to be dedicated. There's a big difference between being involved and being committed. It's the difference between, you got to look at the ham and egg breakfast. The ham and egg breakfast, the chicken was involved, but the pig was committed. So, the question is, are you all in on this? Again, I can't measure that. You could tell me I'm all in, but there's no way to really measure that. Now, some people, they're just not. I mean, they've still got resumes out there looking for something else. They think something better is going to pop up tomorrow. And I can say they're not committed, but again, there's no score for that. There's no measurement for that. Consistency is kind of like discipline. You could argue that you could measure it, but again, I got it on this list because there's not a score for there's not a number that you could put for consistency. Professionalism, one of those things that is very important, but again, can't be measured. Now, that if someone is professional or not, and it's obvious by their actions and what they say and what they do and the way that they carry themselves. So you can look at someone, like I can look at Mike Scott, for example, and say that is a professional. He is someone who is professional. And I could say that about a lot of people in our team. But there's no professional score. I can't put a thermometer in Mike's mouth and then pull it out 2 minutes later and say, wow, Mike, you're 98% professional. I mean, there's no number for that. So, integrity, another thing. I mean, all of these things, if someone's got them. Like, I know if someone's got a bad attitude or not. But there's no score for integrity or honesty. Do you say what you mean and mean what you say? There are cases that you could look and say, well, that person's not integrous because they said that they would send an email, but they never did. They made a commitment to do something, but they never followed through on that commitment. But there's no score for integrity. Persistency. How persistent are you? That's very different than consistency. Persistency is how persistent you are. That's you not giving up. You not giving up on a decision maker. When you're calling and trying to get an appointment, I get that question all the time. How many times should I call before I take them off my list? Well, good question. How persistent are you? If you're not very persistent, maybe after 5 or 6 calls you could take them off. If you're very persistent, you'll leave them on there till you get a hold of them, and they either tell you yes or no. How persistent are you at following up with a decision maker? So after you've met with them, and it's one of those that you did not schedule the meeting the day of the appointment. Well, how persistent are you? How are you going to follow up with them? Are you going to make 3 or 4 phone calls and then assume that they're not interested? Or are you going to stop by and have an article to drop off and just give them, have a reason to show up and get face-to-face with them again? How persistent are you going to be? I cannot tell you how much business people have lost because they were not very persistent. They met with the decision maker, they got the decision maker interested, and they tried to follow up a few times to no avail, and then they just let it die on the vine. They walked away. They were not persistent. And I'll tell you what happens in those cases the majority of the time. Those seeds that they planted someone else comes along and harvests those. Someone else comes along a year later and says, hey, I'd like to talk to you about LegalShield. And they say, yeah, we met with someone, I don't know, must have been about a year ago, and we talked about LegalShield, and it just wasn't a real good time then, but right now is a great time. And they don't think to call you back, even though you met with them originally, because it's not their job to call you back. It's your job to be persistent and be calling them back. And frankly, they probably can't find your card. They can't find your information. They filed it away somewhere. They threw it away. They don't have that anymore. They're not going to go search their email. They're just going to work with the person that shows up. And I know that that happens because I've harvested those things. I've gone into groups where they say, yeah, we had a meeting 2 or 3 years ago. I have no clue who we met with, but it wasn't a good time then. It's a great time now. And I've written some of that business. Well, don't let other people harvest the seeds that you planted. Harvest them yourself, but you do that by being persistent. Again, there is no way to measure desire or determination, two things that go hand in hand. There's no way to really measure that. But I know that they're crucial. And I'm not talking about just wanting something. I mean, you being on the webinar today is proof that you want something. You're willing to take an hour and a half to 2 hours out of your schedule to sit here on a webinar. Of course, that means that you want something. But do you have a burning desire for success in this business? I remember the story. It's one of my favorite stories about the boy that wanted to be successful, and he went to the most successful man in all the kingdom. This is a made-up story, but the logic is good, and the principle is real. He went to the most successful man in all the kingdom and asked him, how do I become successful? And this successful man said to the boy, do you really desire success? And the boy said, yes, of course I do. And he said, no, do you really desire success? And he said, of course. And he said, then follow me. And he went down to the sea. And he walked into the sea, and he told the boy to follow him. And he got about knee deep, and he turned around and he said, are you sure you really desire success? And the boy said, yes, sir, I do. I desire it more than anything. And he said, then follow me. And he went out to where it was deep enough that he could still have his head above water, but the boy was swimming. And he took that boy and he held his head under the water. And he didn't let up, and the boy struggled for air. He struggled. He felt like he was drowning. He was kicking and flailing his arms, and the man still didn't let him up. And it got to the point where the boy almost felt like he was dying and almost gave up, and finally the successful man let him out. The boy swam away from him, thought he was crazy. And the boy cried as he was swimming away, what are you doing? Well, they both met each other back up on the shore, and the man said, I was trying to teach you a lesson. And here's the moral of the story. He said, the day that you desire success as badly as you just wanted air, that's the day that you'll find it. How burning is your desire for success? How ardently do you desire success? And you could apply that to success in business. In this business, you could apply that to success in relationships. You could apply that to success in your health, your physical well-being. How badly do you desire it? How bad do you need it? That'll have everything to do with how determined you're willing to be. See, when you desire success that badly, when you need your LegalShield business to work that badly, you don't take no for an answer. I mean, you like now someone might tell you no, but you don't accept that. You find another way. And that might mean, going back to that group and saying something different. That might mean going and getting another group. But you find a way to make it happen. We spend too much time accepting mediocrity when we should be expecting greatness. we spend too much time accepting mediocrity when we should be expecting greatness. Stop accepting mediocrity. Stop accepting less than stellar results. Stop accepting success that's less than you deserve. And that has everything to do with what's between your two ears, what's up top. It's what's in your mind. And I talk about that, expectation is not on this list, but it very well could be, and maybe should be. Expectation. What do you really expect out of this business? Because some of you sent in your game plans and you said, I want to make $120,000 in the next 12 months. Well, the question is, okay, if that's your case, if that's you, and you said, I want to make $120,000 in the next 12 months, how are you going to feel 1 year from now if you made $110,000? I'm going to tell you, I'm willing to bet that a lot of you that said that, now you said in your goals that you want to make $120,000. But I'm willing to bet that if we got a year from now and you made $110,000, you would feel pretty darn good about that. And you'd be patting yourself on the back saying, I think I did pretty well. And you get, LegalShield would recognize you. They'd give you 2 rings for that. They'd let you talk on stage in front of thousands of people. I mean, they would pour the recognition on. They would put the spotlight on you. They'd make you feel good about that. But would you feel good about it? That's the question. Because the answer to that question has everything to do with whether you really expect those results or just want those results. And the desire that I'm talking about has to be more than just want. It's closer to expectation. Because if you truly expect $120,000 in income, you get to 110 and say, man, I fell short. I was $10,000 short. I better tighten that up and do better next year. What do you expect out of this business? What do you expect to happen this week when you prospect? If you expect to make set up 5 decision maker appointments this week, then don't stop at 3. Don't accept mediocrity. Expect greatness. Go for it. And don't give up until you get it. That's what I'm talking about. I said expectation is not on the list. It's the next one. What you expect. Sorry, I missed that there. I guess when I typed this out, I was thinking along the same lines as I am right now, which is you got to start expecting greatness and stop accepting mediocre results. You're better than that. You know you're better than that. So start acting like it. If you got 3 decision makers scheduled, you're not done. Get back on the phone. Make it happen. You wouldn't go to your kids for Christmas who are expecting a certain gift and say, yeah, sorry, I couldn't get that one, but here's another one instead. You'd feel terrible doing that as a father or mother. Well, if you can be that way about a Christmas gift for your kids, why can't you be that way about your success? You wouldn't go to a boss in your former job. Hey, boss, I know you were expecting these results, but guess what? Good news, I came in halfway there. You'd have figured out a way to get there all the way. Well, why would you do that for some boss somewhere building somebody else's fortune and not have that same level of determination and desire and expectation for your own business when you're building your own fortune? Okay, I know I'm harping on this, guys, but it's real. And I got to be honest with you, I've been around for 17 years and I'm tired of people settling for scraps when they could own the entire palace. And that's my brother's line. Don't settle for table scraps when you can own the entire palace. Quit going down to the ocean. We've got all this opportunity out there, millions of people that would buy this membership. Quit going down to the ocean with a spoon and say, I'm going to get my share. At least get a bucket. I mean, quit accepting mediocrity and start expecting greatness. Okay, this final one here, I want to talk for a few minutes about this, and that is your belief. I was really glad that Jeff Bell mentioned this on our call this morning. What do you believe in? What does your belief look like in this business? I believe that you've got to believe in several different things. One is you got to believe in the company itself. And, and frankly, if you're struggling right now a little bit believing in the company, let me invite you to change that. There has never been a better time to believe in our company than right now today. I hope that by listening to Mr. Bell this morning, that increases your belief. Let me tell you, if you want a big jolt to your belief in this company, go to Ada, Oklahoma. Schedule a trip. It'll be worth your flight. If you bought a plane ticket for $300 or $400 and flew into Oklahoma City and had to rent a car for $100 just to drive down, that $500 investment would be well worth your money to go take a tour of the home office in Ada, Oklahoma, just for what it does to your belief. And by the way, they call it a tour. So if you ask for a tour, you might have to talk their language. It's rural Oklahoma. They're going to give you a tour. But go have that experience. I'm telling you, it would be worth your money. I don't doubt that one bit. Here's another thing. Go to Salt Lake City. You want to believe in this company more? If you feel like that belief needs to, you got to be in Salt Lake City. You got to be in Salt Lake City even if you already believe in the company. But being at a big event does wonders for your belief level in this company. Well, I've learned, again, your belief, that's something that's not measurable. There's no belief score, but it's one of those things that is crucial. If someone doesn't really believe that the company has their best interest in mind and at heart, then are they really going to plant their flag here? Are they really going to do the activity that's going to be required to have the results that they desire? No. That belief in the company is crucial, and it's real. And this is a solid company. That office that you're looking at right there on the screen, they built that, I think it was a $30 million facility at the time. They drove piers way down into the foundation to build it on bedrock. They didn't want to build it on a shaky foundation, so they drilled all these piers and they filled them with concrete so that building would be built on a strong foundation. They wanted a building that was going to last for decades, hundreds of years. They wanted it to, but it was symbolic as well, because they wanted people to feel confident that they could base their belief and their trust and their confidence in this company. And Harlan felt so strongly about that, Harlan Stonecipher, the founder of the company, that when someone says, I'm here to stay, that the company was going to be there for them, and that would be a two-way street. And I'm telling you, it's better today than it ever has been. What about your belief in the products that you sell? How strongly do you believe in your LegalShield membership? You know, it's interesting when I talk to people who say, I don't really want to talk with my friends and my family about this. I do better with strangers. Well, I understand what they might be saying. I mean, I get it, because I think what they're really saying is they don't want to look like, someone that's trying to abuse their relationship to profit off of it. And I get that. But at the end of the day, I would say, in response to anyone with that kind of mindset, you don't believe in these products strongly enough. If you don't want to talk to your friends and your family, at least let them know what you do. Now, I'm not saying you have to go, play pushy salesman and try to convince anybody to do something that they don't want to do. But if you don't at least want to share these solutions, then you don't believe strongly in them. You don't. Because if you did, you would want to share them with people that you know, love, and care about. It would just be a natural desire to try to share these things. They're great products. Well, how do you increase your belief in the products? You better use your plan. So here's my next question, and this is a measurable question. I can't say how much do you believe and measure that. Now, you could answer that, but it wouldn't be measurable. But I can measure this. When's the last time that you used your membership? When's the last time that you picked up your phone and called your law firm? And that's measurable. And I did this last week in Columbus, Ohio. I said, raise your hand if you used your membership this year. And I was pleased. Almost every associate in the room raised their hand. And then I said, raise your hand if you've used it in the last month. And a pretty decent number of associates raised their hand on that, over half. And then I said, how many of you have used it this past week? And I was impressed there. It was, I don't remember how many, but probably 20% of the room that had used it this week. Those are associates who are serious about their membership. Now, I'm not saying that you have to call them every week. I am saying as an associate, I believe that it is your responsibility to use these memberships. So when something happens, if you're just a member and something happens where you're being treated unfairly or whatever, you have the privilege of being able to use your membership to have the law firm at least call and get advice, or have the law firm maybe write a letter on your behalf. As a member, that's your privilege. But as an associate, that's your responsibility. I can't stand when I talk to an associate that's dealing with a situation, and I say, have you called the law firm? And they say, yeah, I really should. Yeah, you think? Yeah, you should. That's not what I can't stand. What I can't stand is when I say, well, why don't you have the law firm write a letter for you? And they say, well, I don't know that I want to do that. No, that's your responsibility to do that. I'm not saying that, you got to be careful because you don't want to damage relationships that you might have, but at least call and get some advice. And you ought to be the first one in line to have the law firm write a letter on your behalf. You ought to be the first one in line to be thinking about how I can use these plans. Again, as an associate, it's not your privilege. It is your responsibility to use this membership. Have you gotten your will done? Have you gotten it updated? At least get it updated once a year. Those are responsibilities that we have, and that increases our belief in the products. And again, it's not measurable, but it's real, and it's noticeable. I remember I had an associate that was calling businesses, and she was trying to set up these decision-maker meetings, and she was really struggling. She was doing the numbers. She was doing some numbers, I'll say, and she just was not getting very good results at all. I mean, I know that that's subjective, but for the way that, she was very sharp, very professional, and her ratio was lower than it really should have been. And I remember I asked her, I said, when's the last time that you used your own membership? And she said, oh, I've never used it. I've never called them. And all of a sudden, it's like, well, no duh. No wonder you're not getting the results that you're looking for. Now, she could have tweaked perhaps other things, but the biggest thing she needed to change, she just needed to use her plan and build that belief. And I cannot explain how that connects. I cannot explain how you using your personal membership is going to change the results that you get calling a decision maker when, especially on the phone, you might not even mention the legal plan. I mean, my script that I use doesn't mention the legal plan. And you're for sure not going to get into any detail about it. So why would that matter? I don't know. I can't explain it, but it does. It affects it. It really does. And if you'll use your membership more and build that belief in the products that you sell, and LegalShield as well, get them to monitor stuff, sign up for the monitoring, and activate all of that. The more that you use your memberships, the more you believe in them. The more you believe in them, the more you're going to sell them. The better results you're going to have, whether you're setting a decision maker or speaking to a group of employees at an enrollment. I can't explain how all of that works. You'll just have to take my word for it that it does, because it's real. And finally, perhaps the most important belief that you and I have to have is this belief in yourself. And I have associates here who really struggle. Oh, they believe in the company. They know LegalShield's a great company. They don't need to fly to Ada. Some of them have already been. And they're users of the product. They know the product's a great product. But when they say, I'm going to be an executive director, I'm going to earn a six-figure income with this company, inside of them, they're riddled with doubt and disbelief. And that doubt, that lack of belief in themselves, is the number one thing working against them. It's the number one thing keeping them from the success that they could have, and I'll go so far as to say the success that they deserve to have. The reality is, ladies and gentlemen, that you deserve success in this business. You deserve it. You can do this business. That's why I like the image there. Some of you just got to cut off that right side of the paper in your own mind. Now, naturally, what helps improve your self-belief is when you do have some good results. When you open that first group, when you do an enrollment and have good results. And results are certainly going to help improve this. But the reality is that the results will typically follow the belief. So maybe you need to subscribe to some affirmations here. Maybe you need to start off each day by looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, today is going to be a great day. And maybe you need to say that multiple times. Maybe you need to look at yourself and say, I am going to set a decision maker meeting today. Maybe you need to look at yourself in the mirror and say 10 times before you go do an enrollment, you are going to rock this enrollment. I am going to rock this enrollment. There is power in repetition. I learned that lesson my second year. And I know all of you have heard that story before, or most of you have, where we had Mr. Stonecipher come and speak at our meeting there in Shreveport. And I got up and I was so excited and the crowd was cheering and I got kind of carried away and I said, this is my second year in the business and I'm going to earn $100,000. I sat down and I thought, why did I say that? I'm not going to earn $100,000. And then Mr. Stonecipher kept repeating it over and over again. And then my team was there. They kept repeating it. I found myself repeating it kind of by default or out of obligation versus, really believing it. But repeating it over and over and over and over again, I started to trick my brain. I started to actually believe that it was going to be true. And I remember the night that I went home and told my wife, I think that we can do this. I think we really can earn a six-figure income. Sometimes just repeating it to yourself will help you believe it. That's why going back to your goals, looking at those goals, keeping them in front of you, the more you look at those goals, not just sit there and look at them, but the more that you work with them, the more real that becomes in your mind, and the more your self-belief improves. I know this. You can do this. You have everything that it takes, even on days that you feel like you don't, even on days where you feel dejected and a little depressed, and you're upset because you needed something to happen, but it didn't happen. You had an appointment, and it didn't go well. You had an enrollment that bombed. You had a decision maker meeting that you thought was going to be the answer to all your prayers, and then it wasn't. Even when bad things happen, you still can do it. Even when you feel like you can't, even when you feel down. And those are days that it's okay to call me. I'll lift you up. I'll tell you how great you are. I'm happy to do that. Frankly, that's another reason why you ought to go to Salt Lake City and meet some of these millionaires. That'll give you some confidence. You meet some of these other people that have done it, you'll be like, dang, if they can do it, shoot, I'm gonna be rich in this thing. I'm serious. And that's not meant to be an insult to them. Maybe it is, but some of them wouldn't even understand that it is an insult to them. I'm telling you, we've got some very bright people, don't get me wrong, but there's some of those people up there that you'll meet and you'll be like, okay, if they can do it, I can do it. And I don't mean to be self-defaming, but I was doing it as a 23-year-old kid with very little experience, not saying the right things the right way, but I was disciplined and I didn't know to stop. I was so naive. When my brother told me to do something, I just did it. That was the best thing I think I had going for me, that and a lot of prayer. My brother, I mean, he was young and inexperienced. And I mean, if you had met him back in his earlier years, today he's pretty sharp, but he's been surrounding himself by millionaires for 25 years. But if you had met him back in those earlier days, you probably wouldn't have been very impressed. I mean, he didn't dress sharp. He didn't look sharp. I mean, you know, I'm not trying to insult my brother here, but he was kind of awkward. But he was disciplined. He believed in himself. I'll tell you that. When none of the rest of us did in our family, he believed in himself. And I say none of the rest. That's not always true. My mom was always a big believer in my brother. The rest of the family was maybe a little bit more skeptical. He had to convince us, and some of that had come from his past failures. He failed in business many times before he succeeded in this business. And I remember he had big dreams and big goals, and he was living before LegalShield. He was living in a tiny little farmhouse without a refrigerator because he couldn't afford one. With his electricity shut off for days, maybe even weeks on end, because he couldn't afford to pay a bill. Just grateful for any groceries that they might be able to buy. Now, he was a hustler. He was a scrapper. He'd make things happen. But, you know, if anybody had a reason not to believe in himself, it was Mark Riches. But he never let that get him down. And when he got in LegalShield, he applied it, and all of a sudden he had the right vehicle, and he applied all of these intangibles, all of these things that you can't measure, and it produced results. Well, that can happen for you as well, and you deserve for that to happen. So any of you out there that are saying right now in your mind, sounds good, I'm glad it's worked for other people, but what about me? Come to Salt Lake City. Let me introduce you to some people that'll make you feel better about yourself. And not just because you're sharper than them, but I can introduce you to some people that dealt with some of that disbelief and self-doubt and were able to overcome it. And look at them now. Go get that Profiles of Success book from the LegalShield store and go read some of those stories. You'll find a story in there that's very similar to yours, and if they can do it, so can you. That's the whole point of those books. It's not just to recognize the people that are in them, although those of us that are in them, we probably like that. I mean, you know, I still get that book and open up to my page to look at, you know, how do I look as our picture? Did they get all the text in and all that kind of stuff? But the real reason they publish those books, the real reason why we do recognition on calls and at big events is to give hope and belief to everyone else that's out there. I hope that being on this training can help you increase your belief in yourself. The reality is you deserve to be successful. And I need you to start believing that right now, today. Right now, today. I need you to know that you can do this business and that you will be successful in this business. And I need you to throw out of your mind anything else. You know, we talk to our kids about controlling the thoughts that they have. Because thoughts about violence lead to words about violence, which leads to actions of violence. Thoughts about, whatever lead to words, and that leads to actions. And so we try to help our kids really kind of control our thoughts. And sometimes they'll get an improper thought, something that's not healthy, and they'll have to chase it away. And the saying that I have with my kids is, you can't keep a bird from landing on your head, but you sure can keep it from building a nest. Don't let those thoughts remain. Thoughts of self-doubt, thoughts where you have bad self-esteem. You can't let those hang around there in your mind. Your mind's too powerful of a tool to let it be infiltrated by negative, by darkness. You can't let that happen. And that goes to this quote here by Henry Ford. If you think you can or you think you can't, either way, you're right. Your thoughts will have a direct impact on your belief. So control what goes in and what comes out. Or control what goes in, and that will have a direct impact on what comes out. Some of you need to be careful about the associations that you have. I mean, frankly, I'm being real with you this morning. That's my job. You got to be careful about the people that you're hanging with, because some of you are hanging with people that are not doing a whole lot for your self-belief. And their negativity and their doubt is bringing you down. You need to control some of that. You be careful about some of that. And if you got those thoughts of self-doubt or self-defeat coming in your mind, chase them away. Get rid of them. Replace them with positivity. And consciously tell yourself that, yes, I can, and I will, and I am doing it. When you make 50 calls today and get 0 appointments, don't feel bad about yourself. Don't allow yourself to pity yourself. Feel good that you did 50 calls. And tell yourself, that's okay, because I did what I could control. And the things that I indirectly control, they'll happen too. Tomorrow will be a better day. Some of that, and it has so much to do with the thoughts that you have and the things that you say, and I mean, all of that. And again, you can't really measure that kind of stuff, but if anything's been clear this morning, the things that you cannot measure are every bit as important as the things that you can measure. All right, well, let's go to our question panel here. I think we might have some questions that I can help answer. Let's make that a little bit bigger. Okay, David from Utah has a great question. David, by the way, I hope you're registered for Salt Lake City. I'm sure that you are. It's in your backyard. That's fantastic. He's got a question on a decision maker. When you talk to a decision maker on the phone or in person, this would probably be more on the phone, and they request for you to send them information. This is a common thing. Decision maker says, "Can you just send me something?" And David says, "What should I send?" And the answer is, we've got some HR flyers. I'll show you those. Let's see here. By the way, I can answer Jim Ryman's question. Next Monday is Labor Day, and so if you'll remember, we need to do this webinar next Monday. I'm sorry, next week's webinar we'll do on Tuesday, because Monday is Labor Day. So next week's webinar will be on Tuesday, same time, 10:30 Central Time. It'll just be next Tuesday. Okay, we're going to go to LS Engage here. I'm going to show you. Let me close my question panel here. And I'll log in here. And I'll just show you some of these HR flyers. David, the long and short of it is, I'll show you some of this stuff. Feel free to send one. But the reality is, I found there's not a whole lot you can send. And so that's going to get you results. So what I like to say to a decision maker, I like to get real with them. And they say, "Can you send me something?" I say, "Can I ask you a question?" And they say, "Sure." And I say, "Are you asking me to send you something because you're just trying to get me off the phone? Or are you really going to take time and look at it?" And I know that's kind of a direct question, but I want to be real with them. And you know, sometimes they'll be real and say, I just really am not that interested. And that's fine. I just don't need to waste any time on that. I'll just mark them as not interested. But if they say, no, I really do want to review it, them saying that, and then I send them the email, they feel kind of obligated to review it. So it does get them to review. But let me just show you, if you click on resources here, and then scroll down to, these will all collapse in a second. Scroll down to Business Solutions Decision Maker Material, I think is where it is. No, that's not it. Where would we go? I'm looking for the HR flyers. There we go. So it's under group enrollment. So if you go to HR flyer, US, right here, that's a good flyer that you could send to an HR person if you wanted to send it by mail. I mean, again, if you're thinking that you're going to do that and then have HR people email you back and say, "Hey, I looked at it, I'm really interested," that's probably not going to happen. But it does give you something, especially if they say, "No, I really am going to read it," and then you follow up the next day and say, "Hey, I just want to follow up with you. I'd love to set an appointment." I'm always asking for the appointment. So I would not follow up the next day and say, "Hey, what'd you think?" because all they're going to say is, "Yeah, I'm not real interested," and maybe they are not, but maybe they didn't read it. But if I say, "Hey, I sent that to you. I just wanted to see if I could follow up next week, and if we could sit down and actually meet, what does next Wednesday at 9:30 look like for you?" That's always going to be my question. Not what'd you think? Are you interested? Do you have time? None of that kind of stuff. But next Wednesday at 9:30, does that work for you? Next Tuesday at 3:30 in the afternoon, does that work for you? It's always going to be about trying to schedule something else. But this is I mean, this is all on the legal. I think there's one on the identity theft as well, if I'm not mistaken. Um, yeah. Um, maybe we could search for go up here to the search and put HR in. That might find it a little bit better. Sorry, guys. I'm just want to see if I can find this for you here. Well, it's not searching. I don't know why it's not. How about if we just search for flyer? Or maybe if I spelled it right, because it's not a frequent flyer. There we go. Yeah, I know that they have one for HR, but we'd have to take a little bit more time than we've got right now to really look down through here and try to find one. So anyway, David, I hope that helps. You could send a legal one as well. Again, I'm trying to get them something to see if I can at least give them what they're looking for. I'm not really trying to pique interest here, because that's not the way to do it. The way to pique interest is to get in front of them, and nothing else is going to replace that. But I also want to respect them if they say, no, I really want to look at something first. That's fine. Just most of those don't turn into appointments, to be frank. Okay, let's see. Shanita asks a question here. What is the difference of leaving a decision maker gift during Go Walk Your Community, and does it matter what it is? I like leaving a handwritten card. I'll write it in my car. After I walk in, I'll take it back. I've also done fresh flowers. Yeah, I would go back and listen to the training that we did a couple of weeks ago on prospecting. I talked about the mugs of chocolate. Those have always been my favorite. They're not super expensive. I mean, you'll pay a few dollars for them, but they're not super expensive. That's what I always used. It just has to be good chocolate. I mean, if you're buying cheap stuff, that's not gonna, it's just not gonna work. It's not gonna have the effect that you want it to have. So Hershey's Nuggets works really well. Lindor Truffles works really well. That looks nice. I've definitely used branded mugs before, but I've mugged companies without a branded mug. I've just gone to the dollar store and bought a mug and filled it with chocolate. If all I'm doing is trying to get an appointment, the chocolate is more important than the mug. Now, you don't want to use an ugly mug to where it detracts, but if you just use a plain mug and you fill it with good chocolate and you put your business card right inside of there, that's what they're going to see, is the chocolate. That's what they're going to notice. The branded mug is a little bit nice if you've got it, so that it's a reminder. That's why we do branding, is it stays in their mind. But I've never called on a decision maker and said, "Hey, did you get the mug of chocolate that I left you?" And they say, "Yeah, and I was not going to give you an appointment, but then when I saw that you had the name of your company on the mug, I decided that I would give you an appointment." It's just not going to make that big of a difference. Now, if I'm prospecting over the phone, I'll bring a mug of chocolate to the decision maker meeting. And since I'm not giving out as many of those, I do like the branded mug at that point. So anyway, hope that is helpful. Well, guys, that's all the questions I've got here today. I just want to thank each and every one of you. I told you we'd get off a little bit early today for plugging in. Remember, next Tuesday, we will gear up for session 5, which is the big one. That's where we talk about the enrollment. But I hope that today's information has been helpful. And maybe you've seen some of these qualities that we're talking about, and you've said to yourself, I could improve in this. I could be more disciplined. I could have a better attitude. I could improve my belief in myself, or whatever. and I hope that you can make some goals to be able to do that. I want to wish you the very best. Thank you again for plugging into these. We'll join you next Tuesday on session 5. God bless every one of you, and we'll talk to you soon.